Now, age and aging in biblical perspective, whether we like it or not, we grow older, and for a long time, and I think that is probably the experience of many of you, you feel you're one of the youngest people in a group, in a team, among colleagues, and then gradually that changes. You're no longer the youngest, and it changes further, and gradually you become one of the older people in the group. And quite often now, I see that I'm with a group of people or a group of colleagues, and when we look at who is the oldest in years, then I am actually the oldest. Will be 82 next month, and so I'm happy and thankful and grateful to have the kind of vitality that I still have. But at the same time, you cannot help but feeling also that more than half of it is past, and that life does have an end, and it makes you think about aging and about advanced age. So the title is Age and Aging in a Biblical Perspective. I've just written a manuscript on that topic for Stamborough Press, which they have accepted, and I'll say a little more about that in just a few minutes. But it is a relevant topic. Let me just try to get my screen cleared up a little bit. I still see some of you on my screen, and I want to just see the... Yeah, let me just trying to get rid of... Well, it'll have to be that way. Okay. Not going... Let me see now. Just have a little patience, because it's not going exactly how I want to. Well, it'll have to be this way. So age is a relevant topic, and I think for those of you who are in the United States, you're very much aware of the fact that in the American political scene, it has been a much talked about topic. The fellow in the middle, Mr. Biden, is he really able to do his job properly? And is he fit enough, mentally fit enough, physically fit enough to go for another term in the White House? The fellow to the left has been saying, no, he is not. And it's irresponsible for him to run for the highest office in the country. But then, of course, in the last 2 weeks, things have changed very, very significantly. And the fellow to the left is now the oldest one who has ever run for United States president at the age of 78. So things can change pretty drastically, but you can see that age can be a very relevant topic for quite some time. And I've added a picture to the right, the man who leads the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and Ted Wilson, and I believe he is now 74 and is certainly willing to go for another term of 5 years as the leader of our church, and everything looks like that is what he plans to do, at least indicate that he is available for another term. And for some people, that is actually also something that you wonder about. Is he still able? Does he still have the stamina to go for another 5 years? We'll have to see how that will be. But of course, you have people who make it into old age and remain very fit, physically at least sufficiently fit, mentally okay. Take Her Majesty the Queen Elizabeth, who reached 96, mostly in reasonably good health. And most of you will recognize the fellow in the middle, Herbert Blomstedt, the Swedish director of many famous symphony orchestras. And we hope that he will soon return to Amsterdam, to the Concertgebouw, so that we can see and hear him again and talk with him again. But Herbert Blomstedt, he has had some physical problems, yes, but he is still there at 97. Recently, he became 97, leading out in a big orchestra. And the fellow to the right, I don't know that all of you will know him. I think Andreas knows him, yes. He is now the oldest man in the village of Wokingham, near Newbold College, Dr. John Woodfield. Hundreds and hundreds of people, pastors around the Trans-European Division, have sat in his classes. He is now 107. And although he has a few mobility problems, he is still mentally as if he is 25. And it was such a joy that when not that many years ago, I held a talk at Newbold, and lo and behold, there was Dr. John Woodfield coming to listen to me. He must have been 103 or 104 at that time, and knew exactly who I was and when I had been his students. So for many people, becoming old is a blessing, and they stay with us and contribute for a long time. The oldest person that we know of for sure in the Western world and has documented dates for also the birth is Jeanne Calment. I think that's how you pronounce it, Calment. She was born in 1875 and lived till 1997, 122 years and 5 months. And it was only in the last few years that she lived in a retirement home. But for most of the time, she was living independently on her own. That's an exception, however. It's not for all of us to expect that we will live till 122. Most Seventh-day Adventists have heard of places in the world where a considerable percentage of the people live until a high age, and have heard about the so-called blue zones. There were two demographic specialists, Italians, who were trying in Sardinia to locate areas with people with high ages, and they circled on the maps that they were working with areas in the area, zones in the area with a blue pen. And so these were then referred to as the blue zones. And that is something that was picked up later, in particular by Dan Butner, the journalist who first wrote about several of these places around the globe, 5 of these places that had a very high percentage of people of 100 years and more. Okinawa in Japan, Sardinia in Italy, where the word blue zones was first conceived of, an area in Greece, Icaria, an area in Costa Rica, Nicoya, and then the Seventh-day Adventist community around Loma Linda in Southern California, the so-called blue zones, where people have an average age that is considerably higher than in most other places on the globe. But, you know, we are not all going to be 100, and many of us, at least not without problems. I'm still trying to get these pictures of the... I still see part of my screen is yet filled with some of the pictures of the people in the audience, and that...
Yeah, but it looks fine to us, Reinder. We
Yes,
can see it just fine.
Then I cannot see my entire screen. I don't know what to do about it. Well, it'll have to be what it is. Not all of us are going to live to be 122 years, and many of us, and I guess many in the audience this morning, this evening, wherever you are concerned about the future. One of the concerns, of course, is our health. If we are lucky enough to be quite healthy, even when we are in our 70s or 80s, that is good. But still, how is it going to work out in the future? Will our health remain good, or will we have severe health problems? And connected with that, of course, the question of mobility. I'm still walking every day for about an hour, 5-6 kilometers, not at the same speed as Björn will be having as he runs from London to Paris. But I feel happy and lucky that I can still have that kind of mobility. But then all over the place, you meet people who are behind a walker, or you have people in their scootmobile. For many of the elderly people, mobility has become a major concern. A major concern also, will we have good care as we become older? And if when we face more limitations, will we have care? Will there be care? Will we be able to, and that's the finances, will we be able to pay for the kind of care that we need, and maybe for the kind of extras that we want to have? Well, for many people, there is the fear and also the reality of loneliness. If we are older and we still have a partner, then that is a great blessing. But for many people, comes the moment that they no longer have a partner, or there may be other reasons why they will be lonely. And that seems to be one of the great problems of the older generation, loneliness. And then, of course, we do know that our lives are finite, that we are not going to live forever, and we become more and more aware of our mortality. I'm still quite regularly invited to conduct a funeral, but very seldom to conduct a wedding. It seems that just there is more of the end of life around me than often the beginning of it. So there are these concerns that most of us who become older are dealing with. and some of the issues that society has to deal with. There are lots of areas of discrimination in today's world, and they often have to do with race or with gender, but there is also definitely the discrimination of age, ageism as it is called. It may differ from place to place, but many of us realize that as we become older, we are put into a certain category and maybe are not taken as seriously as we would expect to be. There is in Western society definitely a graying of the society. The number of people of 65 and older is increasing rapidly. And that is not only true in the society at large, but that is certainly in the Western world also true of the church, the graying of the church. A little more about that in a moment. Society has to deal with the burdens of society. Where are all these older people going to live? How will they be cared for? People ask themselves, should we maybe have certain tests for people who become older? Well, in the political world, there has been this idea, maybe people should be tested as far as their mental capacities is concerned. Are they able to take such an enormous responsibility as political leadership requires? Should there be some kind of test? We do have a driving test. And I think that, I don't know how difficult it is in America to get your driver's license renewed. But I can tell you that where I live, it can be quite a challenge when you're over 75 and you want to have your driver's license renewed. And if there's something in your medical record that they don't like, then it can become quite a hassle to get your license renewed. Well, should there be such tests? Should there maybe also age limits for certain roles? Now, in some occupations, and that depends from country to country. The United States, you can be a judge in the High Court, I believe, for as long as you live. I think our country, the upper limit for a judge is 75.
It started? Hasn't started yet.
In our country, I hear something that is not quite right.
Yeah, no, I fixed it. Somebody was unmuted and it's fixed now.
Okay. So in our country, you can be a professor in the university until age 70, but then you are required to retire. Now, in the Seventh-day Adventist Church in the Netherlands, when I retired at age 65, that was required. I had no choice. Now, supposedly about 67 that you have to retire, although it seems that it is not applied as rigorously as it was in the past. But so something that's a good thing. I would have liked to continue working for a while when I was 65, but that was the rule. So I had to find some other stuff to do. I did find some other stuff to do, but still, is this a good idea? Age limits. Is it a good idea to have term limits? That is a related question. And there, I think the answer most people would give is yes, it would be a good idea. Maybe also for General Conference presidents. Some statistics. Life expectancy. In the Middle Ages, when you consult different books, you find sometimes different statistics, but the best I could find that the average that scholars think as far as life expectancy in the Middle Ages was 33. Of course, there were also older people, but infant mortality was high, and you would have epidemics and high casualties in wartime, etc. So there were older people, yes, but life expectancy average 33. By 1900, it was 47. So that was a considerable improvement. Today, worldwide, life expectancy for men is almost 70, and for women, it's about 73. In many European countries, it is just over 80. Hong Kong tops the list with 85 plus. In Switzerland, 83. The UK, 81 almost. And that is, the Netherlands is somewhere there. I think Germany is somewhere there. And the USA is slightly lower at 76. But as far as life expectancy is concerned, there has been a very, very considerable improvement over time. But then there is another figure that is important, and that is the percentage of aging people in the world and in our society. In 1980, a little over 5% of the world was above the age of 65. Today, and that is just 45 years later, almost 10% of the world population is over 65. By the year 2100, the expectation is that 25% of the world population will be over 65, and 30%, 1 in 3 people in Europe, will be over 65. So when you think about these statistics, you can see that scholars and politicians, they really are worried what this means and what kind of measures will be needed in order to make this to have a world that still functions well. The graying church, the median age of Christians, and this is a very interesting statistic. In sub-Saharan Africa, it is the lowest. It is 19, and excuse me, it shouldn't be percent, but it should be just 19. The median age of Christians is 19. In Europe, the median age of Christians, people who say that they belong to a church, that they are Christians, and we are not looking at whether they are actually active Christians or not, but those who say that they are Christians, the average age is 42. In the UK, it is still higher. The average age of all Christians in the UK is 51. And in the USA, when it comes to white evangelicals, I have not been able to find a figure for all the Christians, but when it comes to white evangelicals, it is 56. So that is clear that there is a very large segment of Christianity that you might call gray, that is above the average median age. The median age of Seventh-day Adventists is 12% worldwide is over 65. In North America, 40% of the Seventh-day Adventists is between 54 and 73. And 20%, 1 in 5, is over 73. Now, when you go and look at the figures for Europe, you'll find that the figures are quite different when it comes to, for instance, the Balkan. There, the median age of the Adventists is much lower than, for instance, in Scandinavia. And I think that probably the median age is highest in Norway of any country in Europe. And when you visit Norway and go to the churches, and I did so many times, then you actually see it confirmed before your eyes that the average attendees in the church are either gray or bald. So there's a graying society in the Western world in particular, and there is a graying church in also the Western world in particular. And you can see that that is why I became interested in the topic, that there are so many things connected with age and aging. And not only it is an existential problem for all of us when we start moving beyond 65, 70. And so that is why I decided to do some thinking about it and to do some writing about it. And the manuscript that I have delivered to the Stemborough Press, the professional title, I don't know whether they will go ahead and use it, is The Burdens and Blessings of Aging, with the subtitle about becoming and being a Christian senior. Now, when you see the word aging, when I sent my topic to Lauren, he corrected the word aging. And I should have expected that, because in American English, aging is spelled with A-G, I-N-G, and the British, they have an extra E in the word. So this is the British title, Burdens and Blessings of Aging. So I'm certainly not an expert on many of these different topics, because it is such a wide area of topics. But there is very little, actually, I found written about this topic within our society, within our church in particular. In our society, there is quite a bit within our church. And yet, more and more of the members of our church, and also of the churches where I come on Sabbath, more and more you see people who are actually potential people that I potentially address in this particular book, The Burdens and Blessings of Aging. Well, what does the Bible say? What does the Bible, how does the Bible guide us? We're told in the Bible that we were created with the intention of ongoing life. We call that conditional immortality. We were to be immortal on the condition that mankind would remain obedient to the will of God. And disobedience caused death, death becoming universal, not only for mankind, also for the animal kingdom, etc. There are lots of difficult questions about death, and we are not going to deal with that today. Of course, there is the question, would there have been death at some point if man had not sinned? Or would there always have been, for instance, in the animal kingdom? So there are difficult questions that others have thought about and talked about, but there certainly is not consensus. What we do know as Christians, or do believe as Christians, is that yes, there is death, but death will disappear. Death has been conquered, but that has required a superhuman invention, Jesus Christ, who conquered death for us. Those are the basic facts of the Bible. We see that when we start reading the Bible, that yes, death came, but at first people had excessive high ages. When you look at the first chapters of Genesis, you see these gentlemen, and we're not given the ages of the ladies, but we see that Adam, 930, Seth lived 912, Enos 905, and so the story goes on. The person with the highest age, Methuselah, 969, but Noah is not very far behind. He lived to be 950, and Genesis tells us that he lived 600 years before the flood, and he lived 350 years after the flood. We find some interesting echo from ancient times. You know, we have always wondered about these high ages of these characters in the first chapters of Genesis. But in an Oxford museum, the Asmolean Museum, there is a prism, cuneiform, the Weld Blundell prism, it is called. And that gives a list of kings, of 8 different kings who reigned over a range of cities in lower Mesopotamia, over a period of almost 250,000 years. So you see these high ages in Genesis 1 to 10, and here you see these extreme long reigns of these kings in Mesopotamia. Does that have something in common? Is that a reflection of a common tradition that in the very beginning there were very high ages? We have also a list of Sumerian kings, so that's also in Mesopotamia, by a certain Berossos. That's a document that is somewhat more recent, 3rd century BC, and that also, it has a list of kings, 10 kings who reigned even longer than the kings that are listed on that prism that is in the Oxford Museum. So it's interesting to see that there are these long periods in these ancient documents that somewhat reflect what we find in the book of Genesis. But soon after the flood, we find that there is a shift to much shorter ages. And then we see for a certain period that the average age seems to be somewhat in the region of 120, the maximum age. Moses dies at age 120. His brother, a little older, 123. There is mention of a priest in 2nd Chronicles who reaches the age of 130 years. But when we look at the kings of Judah and see when they died, and somebody has done the calculation, and I must stress that that calculation is correct, it says that the average for the kings of Judah was 46. So time goes on, and the ages that people reach becomes lower. In the book of Isaiah, we see that the prophet has a dream. Let me read it. Never again will there be in it, that is in the new world that God is going to create, an infant who lives but a few days, or an old man who does not live out his days. The one who dies at 100 will be thought a mere child, and the one who fails to reach 100 will be considered accursed. So, whereas the author of Isaiah seems to think of the future as it will develop, and some have interpreted that as the new earth that we are going to reach, yet, many of these themes are picked up by John in his Revelation, but here for Isaiah, he has still the possibility of death, but an infant who dies 100 years old, and an old man, if he dies 100 years old, he is just like a child, and that is not a blessing, but a curse. That is for Isaiah, there will be a paradise with longevity, with worldwide blue zones where people will reach very high ages. Psalm 90, one of the 8 psalms that are attributed to Moses, and that probably received its final form during or shortly after the Babylonian exile. But let's not get into that when exactly those psalms received their final form. But the psalmist here says, all our days pass under your wrath. We finish our years with a moan. Our days may come to 70 years or 80 if our strength endures. Yet the best of them are but trouble and sorrow, for they quickly pass and we fly away. So we have often heard these words, and they make us think, for those of us, and that's many of us who are together tonight or this morning, many of us, we are in our 70s or 80s. And some of what we experience is trouble and sorrow. Fortunately, and I hope that's true for many of you, it's not just only trouble and sorrow. So reality is that we are mortal. Just as sin entered the world through one man, death, and death through sin, in this way, death came to all people. That is what we know. Psalm 90, the Psalm of Moses, it says 70, 80, maybe a little more, but that's it. Well, if that's so, it then gives us also the counsel that we should number our days so that we may be wise. And there is a text in an Egyptian text that is quite old, stems from the 6th dynasty of the Old Kingdom, about more than 4,000 years old. And a high dignitary describes how old age had caught up with him. And he writes, age is here, old age arrived, feebleness came, weakness grows. Childlike one sleeps all day, eyes are dimmed, ears deaf. Strength is waning through weariness, the mouth silence, speaks nothing. The heart void recalls not the past, the bones ache throughout. Good has become evil, all taste is gone. What age does to people is evil in everything. The nose clogged breathes not painful are standing and sitting. Well, what he said 4,000 years ago, that is what many people have experienced. Painful are standing and sitting. Strength is waning through weariness. Yes, eyes are dim and ears deaf without the kind of spectacles and hearing aids that we have today. That must have been quite problematic in ancient Egypt. But it's very much also what we hear in the book of Ecclesiastes, where we hear, remember your Creator, Ecclesiastes 12, in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come and the years approach when you will say, I find no pleasure in them. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars grow dark and the clouds return after the rain, when the keepers of the house tremble and the strong men stoop, when the grinders cease because they are few, and those looking through the windows grow dim, when the doors to the street are closed and the sound of grinding fades, when people rise up at the sound of birds, but all their songs grow faint. When people are afraid of heights and of dangers in the streets, when the almond tree blossoms and the grasshopper drags itself along and the desire no longer is stirred, then people go to their eternal home and mourners go about the streets. Remember him before the silver cord is severed and the golden bow is broken, before the pitcher is shattered at the spring and the wheel broken at the, what's that further?
Well,
At the well, and the dust returns to the ground it came from, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. So that is how many people have experienced the process of becoming older. And this text in Egypt and this text from the writer of Ecclesiastes, they sound very much the same. And it may be some of the feelings that some of us have. And some of us who feel that we are maybe somewhat handicapped by the problems of old age, well, we must remember that there are also biblical examples of people who had their own troubles. Isaac, his eyes were so weak he could no longer see, we are told. And somewhat similar is said of Jacob. Eli, the priest, was visually impaired, we hear in the book of Samuel. And David, remember, he could not keep warm. He had to go through all kinds of measures to try to keep the king warm. Of King Asa, we read that his feet became diseased. So what people experience today, that is not something new. That's a process that has been there also in Bible times. But then let's remind ourselves, when David says, my flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. And although the Bible speaks about the process of becoming older, sometimes in rather negative words, being old seems not only to be a negative experience in the Bible. It struck me as I was preparing this particular presentation that I never thought of that actually before, that God is referred to as the Ancient of Days. And that's not what we would like to say of ourselves. We would not like to characterize ourselves as being ancient. But God apparently has no problem being referred to as the Ancient of Days. That is not something that is negative. And the heavenly throne is, God is surrounded by a company of elders. Now, don't want to make too much of that fact, but to use that word for the group of special beings that is surrounding God as elders, that is somehow, it gives food for thought. Proverbs 20, verse 29, the glory of the young man is their strength, but gray hair, the splendor of the old. Now, Lauren was referring to his gray hair, so he should take some comfort from this text. I must find another text because even the gray hair is mostly gone. Isaiah, even to your old age and gray hairs, I am he. I am he who will sustain you. I have my hand on you and will carry you. I will sustain you and rescue you. So God is there, yes, for young people, but he is certainly there also for us who are older. And in the Bible, age and wisdom are two things that are consistently connected. In the psalm that we just referred to, it is that the wish is that we may gain a heart of wisdom. T.S. Eliot, the famous poet. He said that old men, and I suggest that it also applies to old women, must be explorers. There's always something new to do and to read and to find out. We must be explorers. He says we must be moving into another intensity. Job, he says, is not wisdom found among the aged? Does not long life bring understanding? And we may feel that is not always the case. When we look at people around us, long life does not always seem to bring understanding. But in many cases, yes, we can enjoy, we can appreciate the experience and the wisdom of people who have lived a long and productive life. Not only wisdom is an aspect that is connected with the aged, with the elderly, and so that's most of us, we also should be respected. The younger generation, our children, they're told, honor your father and your mother. Leviticus, stand in the presence of the aged, show respect for the elderly. Now, that applies to maybe when you travel in the bus and you're standing, there's no place for you to sit, that we may say, well, read Leviticus 19:32 and offer me your seat. That would be nice, but it's more than that. And so Proverbs goes on by saying, listen to your father and do not despair your mother when she is old. Cursed, Deuteronomy, is anyone who dishonors their father and their mother. So that is a biblical notion of becoming older, that there is wisdom and you should get the respect of people around you. I have here a text that is from Shirak, and let me see. Yeah, but I have to make sure that I can read the text still. Yeah, why don't you read it, Afje? Okay, okay. Nou, dat lukt dus niet. No, dat lukt dus niet. Wacht even.
I can read it for you if you're having trouble seeing it.
It just bothers me that I cannot get my screen clear enough. But okay, you read it, please.
Yeah, go back to the one that you just left here. Shirak 3:12-16. My child, help your father in his old age, and do not grieve him as long as he lives. Even as if his mind fails, be patient with him, because you have all your faculties. Do not despise him. Whoever forsakes a father is like a blasphemer, and whoever angers a mother is cursed by the Lord.
Yeah, well, I wondered whether I should add this quotation from this apocryphal book. But I guess we are learning nowadays that even Ellen White quoted from the Apocrypha.
Right.
If she did, then maybe we are allowed to do also. But this could be from any place in the Old Testament, the kind of language that is used here. But that is a very moving statement here by this author from about 200 before Christ. The focus in the Bible is not only on older people. The focus is also on younger people. We do not, well, actually, Jesus died, his life on earth ended when he was about 33. So he never became a model in that sense for people of older age. And he emphasized the value of children coming to him. And no doubt elderly people were welcome also as they came to meet him. And the Apostle Paul emphasizes when he writes to Timothy that you don't need to be old in order to be a leader, in order to earn the respect of the people. It's not just old people in the Bible. It is also young people. And if there's anything that is important, and I think that is important in our church at all levels, also on the local level, that is this so-called intergenerativity. It's a modern word. It was coined just a couple of decades ago during a conference in Nepal, of all places. But what it means is that when you have some kind of organization, any kind of organization, when you have some project, when you have a team, it is important that various generations are together. They work together, they cooperate, and they support each other. And that is, I think, important also for church boards. It is important for boards at the conference level and higher up. It's important to have a balance of age groups, young people on committees to make sure that the different generations are heard, but definitely also the people who are somewhat older and the people at the other end of the scale. Intergenerativity, people of different age groups working together, supporting each other, trying to bring out what maybe the other generation has not in the same sense. There are some moving prayers in the Bible that many of us may want to repeat. Do not cast me away when I'm old. Do not forsake me when my strength is gone. And that is also in Psalm 71, verse 18. And again, I cannot read it on my screen. And could you read it for me, Lauren?
Absolutely. Psalm 71:18, even when I'm old and gray, do not forsake me, my God, till I declare your power to the next generation, your mighty acts for all who are to come.
So just one final thing. It is Paul Tournay, psychologist, philosopher. He urges elderly people in a book about growing old that it is important that we adopt an attitude of positive acceptance of non-fulfillment. In other words, he says that we may be proud of all the things that we have been able to do in our life, but as we approach the end of our life, we also realize that many things have not succeeded, and many desires and many hopes were not fulfilled. But he says we must have an attitude of positive acceptance of those things that did not go well. Because if you cannot accept that, then you become bitter and you have a pretty awkward final part of your life. Our citizenship is in heaven, and we eagerly await a Savior from there, the Lord Jesus Christ, who by the power that enables us to bring everything under control, and he will control our lowly body, and that will transform our lowly body. And what does it say then?
So they will be like his glorious body.
Thank you. One more thing.
I can read those if you can't get them.
The prophet Isaiah was dealing with King Hezekiah. And Hezekiah was, as you know, he was ill, feared that he would die, and then he got another 15 years. But the prophet said one thing that I think applies to all of us. He said to Hezekiah, put your house in order because you're going to die. And that's an advice that is actually given to all of us. We know that there will be an end. It may be in 15 years, we may not be given 15 years. But he said, put your house in order. If there are things, problems that need to be solved, solve them. If there is a problem with people and you need to make peace in time. Put your house in order. Well, I have some questions that maybe could lead us in our discussion. Psalm 90 said that we must number our days. What does that mean? How can elderly people follow the suggestion of the poet Eliot to become explorers? Is old age for most people a blessing rather than a heavy burden? And can we turn a burden into a blessing? Is it possible to honor elderly people who clearly are not wise?
Mm-hmm.
And what does putting your house in order, what does that concretely mean in our time? And we might say in our personal situation. So maybe this can help us a little bit with the discussion, but not necessarily so. And I'll hand over to you, Lauren.
Yeah, I was going to actually ask Linda if she wanted to take over for us. Linda, are you here? Yeah, this really this is a good discussion for me because it's impossible not to be thinking about that as you grow older. I was just thinking this week when we were young, oh my goodness, old age and death seemed so far off. You didn't even consider it. You didn't think of it. It didn't cross your mind to think what's going to happen when I grow old. Uh, you know, I remember Art and I used to drive around in my sports car and talk with each other. Both of us were single guys. We were just like, oh man, young. It just didn't think too much of it. And Reinder, I remember a pastor who told me when I did a funeral, he said, Lauren, you always have to tell them Ecclesiastes 9:5. Never preach, especially if they're not Adventists there. Pound it in their heads that the dead know not anything. And I did quote from Ecclesiastes 9:5, but I thought the part that was a little more profound was the first part, the living know that they shall die.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the second part isn't all that comforting, but the first part is a little bit like God says, hey, I'm not taking you by surprise. You will surely die. It's going to happen. And you might as well be ready for it. And you might as well think about it and plan for it, right? Because it's going to happen inevitably. Nobody except for Jesus and maybe Enoch didn't even Jesus died. Even Jesus had to go through death. So yeah, this is an interesting topic, and I've been thinking about this, thinking some rather dark thoughts about all of this as you've been talking. Linda, do you want to take over from here? Yeah, you're
Sure,
unmuted.
I'll start. I got an email or a text from Lauren saying that he wanted someone who had a deep and long-standing grasp of old age to moderate today, and mine was the first name that popped to the top of his list. I tried to explain that I began to turn gray in my 20s, but I'm just afraid he hacked into my Crepe Erase account. Maybe, I'm not sure. All the women know what Crepe Erase is.
My goodness. I'm sorry. I said to Linda for saying that to you, if you were here, you should whack me really hard for being so rude. I apologize, Linda.
Well, my joy in old age is to pull up to a restaurant and my 22-year-old Jaguar was stick shift and get out with my white hair and ask the valet if he knows how to drive manual. And they generally do not. So I do have some pleasure at that. But where are the hands? Come on, you guys. I mean, are you so afraid of old age you can't think of anything to ask Dr. Bruinsma about? I'll start. Dr. Bruinsma, I'm fortunate in that when you talk about getting your house in order, that my daughter pays for the long-term care insurance for my husband and for me. It's not as much an act of largesse as you might imagine. I think it's principally a defensive move because she doesn't want to have us come and live in her home at any time in the future if we become infirm or mentally lacking in acuity. But I wonder, truthfully, when you talk about that, if in your if in fact people really generally don't get their house in order, what do you see here, and what have you learned in your study?
Well, I think that there are people who really have everything thought through and have made preparations for all eventualities. For most of us, we don't like to think so much about the end or what precedes it. So it is sometimes for many of us difficult to talk about that. And I can relate to that. A lot depends also on your personal situation and also where you live. Now, when it comes to long care, to start with that, when you mentioned that, yes, we worry in my country. We also worry, of course, whether we will be able to get enough extra care when needed. But basic care is always there for everybody, and so there is not the worry that your insurance might not pay for you when you need extensive hospital treatment or when you even need a hospice. That is all taken care of. Now, there may be some other things for which, yeah, it's always good to have some money, but it depends a lot from country to country as to whether the fear that you don't have enough money for these last years of your life, that depends very much on where you live. But there are many issues that in many families remain unsolved. Issues with children, issues with friends, and things that remain unsolved, and people die, and without having tried to clear up the difficulty. So it's, I think, one of the key things that Isaiah was thinking about. Get your house in order. Make sure that these issues are taken care of.
Yes, exactly. Robert, what are you thinking? What are your issues today?
I would like to comment on that, getting your house in order. I had a very good example of that in my family, where my mother's sister, my aunt and uncle, they built themselves when they retired a beautiful house overlooking a lake, 2 floors, very large house. And then when they got older, they, on their own, they didn't have to be convinced, they sold it, moved into a small seniors apartment. A few years later, they wanted to be near their 3 boys, so they got out of that apartment and moved to where the boys were, instead of insisting that the boys should move back to look after them. On the other hand, with my grandmother, when grandfather died, she asked her daughter, her unmarried daughter, who was working at St. Helena, California, to come home and look after her. And that daughter told me that she resented that. She wondered why her mother couldn't have come and lived with her instead of interrupting her work and her social life. So I've had two examples of that in my own family, and I have made the decision now that I am downsizing and moving to a smaller place so that when I die, my brothers won't have to go through everything and wonder, what's this? Should we keep it? And it'll make it easier for them. I think we all need to think of that and do it on our own instead of being forced.
Mhm.
Yeah, what a proactive response. Reinder, what do you think?
Yes, I think that sounds very good. But at the same time, of course, we are not all the same. Some of us find it easier to come to that kind of decision than others. But yes, if we can, we do well to be proactive. And what you see all the time is when people live somewhere and they like where they live, they say, well, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to stay there. And then the moment comes that they have to leave. But they are then forced, and it's under unpleasant circumstances, and they can no longer enjoy also the new kind of adventure that they are beginning. So, when people tell me, we want to stay where we are, then I would sometimes say, well, think about it again, and you might as well try to move to something that is, better for this period in life, and still enjoy it. When you start something, even moving to a smaller apartment, if it is something that you have to do because it's the end of the road, that is a different thing from when you think, well, okay, we may have a couple of more years. Let's be comfortable and let's do it in an environment that we can still enjoy, get some new stuff, maybe. But we are not all the same. For some people, that is more difficult than for other people. But certainly also the feeling that, when you say I have to downsize, for many of us, it is, what are we going to do with our library? My wife tells me all the time that I have enough books, and well, I tell her somebody will take care of it. Secondhand books are not worth anything anyway. But whatever it is, there are things that we need to deal with, whether it's living somewhere, whether it's the kind of things that we own. We just have to try to be realistic as to where we are. At the same time, we need to enjoy things that we can do for as long as we can.
Thank you. Lauren, weigh in again.
Yeah, something I was thinking about as you were talking, Reinder, how the world has changed in terms of rapidity of change. I mean, I remember thinking when I was young that my grandparents were wise, and yet it became quickly evident that there were so much in the world that I lived in that they didn't understand at all. Because the world was changing so fast. And as I get older, I began to feel that way about myself. And I kind of felt, Reinder, that the thing that happened to Joe Biden was, in a way, not a good thing for older people, because it made us feel like maybe we should start looking at old people and saying, well, you're past it. We can't have you leading out anymore. Now, I'd say most older people realize that, and they say, I'm not going to push myself to the top here. But then you have the Joe Bidens and the Ted Wilsons who can't seem to give up, which I say, get out of the way. And I've often thought about this. When do you know when the wisdom of youth should be put in place rather than the wisdom of age? We're not in that kind of traditional society anymore. Maybe we should be, the kind where we all go and consult the elders and ask their wisdom, but we're not there anymore, Reinder. Probably in religion, we last a bit longer because it is by nature a traditional or a
You applauded him
discipline,
wildly and ran out and gave him a big kiss.
a discipline that maybe it is a discipline that um, gives more respect for tradition and age. But in a lot of places in the world, I heard recently somebody say that if you've not made your first million by the time you're 35, you're not going to be successful. And I thought, whoa! I mean, that's an amazing statement. Are we really in an era when being old just doesn't mean that much anymore? Even I, at my age, looked at Joe Biden and thought, man, I hope he gets out of here because this is not a good thing for our country. And I'll bet a lot of people did.
Yeah.
How do you know when it's time to step aside?
Well, at least I was beginning to feel very sorry for him. But it is important, I think, that people tell you when it's time to quit with something. But the question is, who tells you? If it is the people who are closest to you, I think that is different from when there's all kinds of just rumors of people who say, well, he is past his prime age, he should stop. Now, if and that would be probably true for you, when you preach somewhere, there's always people who say, that was great, Pastor. You did well this morning. So if you only listen to those people, then you are likely to make a mistake. But when the people who are closest to you say, well, it's really, you're not coherent anymore, and this was really not up to the level where it should be. So please, then, or when a close colleague that you really appreciate tells you, that should be the kind of thing that I think that you should that should weigh more. And so in Biden's case, what I understand was that, at least what we heard of it, was that his relatives, his close family, was still encouraging him to continue. And of course, that becomes a very difficult situation when that happens.
Yeah.
Well, I look at it from a distance, but I think it's such a very good thing that he finally made that decision that he did. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, you're talking about getting ready for the end. I just looked it up. 68% of Americans lack a valid will or die intestate.
Mm-hmm.
Just so you know, most of us don't want to settle up for our inevitable end.
What you said about that not understanding another generation, a younger generation, of course, that is true. That each 20 years or so, a new generation is born.
Yeah.
With different ideals and with different ambitions. And so it's very difficult to really understand some of these things that people do. On the other hand, when I look back and say, when I was 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, I had very little appreciation for older people. Our generation felt we knew much better. And when I was a young pastor with my young colleagues, we couldn't wait until the older generation had passed off the scene because, they were really not with it anymore.
Yes.
But it seems that today there is more of a willingness to learn from each other and appreciate each other than there has been in the past. I think the generation that you and I belong to, we know that the younger folks know stuff that we don't know. And we are very much aware of that. And we are willing to ask them and to be helped by them. At the same time, there is also a greater willingness by many of them to listen to us. You look at the Pope, when he goes to a youth congress of his church, and there's millions of young people that are really eager to listen to him. And I don't compare myself with the Pope, but, a couple of years ago, I was asked to come and speak at the youth congress. And I said, are you, why are you inviting me? I'm an old guy, and in particular, the topic that they wanted me to talk about, etc. But they said, well, you're mistaken. The young people, they don't care how old you are, as long as you've got something significant to say.
Yeah.
And so, but that is more the case today than it was in the past, I think. So it's not all bad.
Thank you.
Well, and it varies too, I think, in terms of cultures. I don't know a lot about this, but I've heard that the Japanese culture, for example, values old age and wisdom, and that's probably less so in other parts of the world. But Jerry, good to see you. Well, I thought I had asked you to unmute, but apparently I didn't. Here we go. So what are you thinking? Jerry, I think your microphone must be off because I'm not hearing you.
I'm not hearing him either.
I see your lips moving and you are unmuted. Yeah, I'm not seeing it. Let me go to Ray and Bobby, and I'll come right back to you after that. Can you guys unmute?
Can
There
you
you
hear?
Yes, sir. We can.
A couple of things. We seem, and maybe it's a natural thing, but I would suggest we're overly obsessed with age. We look at each step along the way. I'm getting older, and yada, yada, yada. Many of the texts that he quoted talked about different age groups and what they can bring to the situation. And he also mentioned that younger people are beginning to realize that we need to listen to everybody. So instead of focusing on age when we talk about competence or incompetence, I think it should be more about a collective intelligence and not just say this group or these people should be leaders or not leaders, or they have an understanding or they don't have an understanding. So forget about the age and live your life. Now, living life means as you do progress through that you stay open, because it's also been brought up that there's a lot of changes that happen that, quotes, older people don't understand. Well, I don't think they do not have the capability of understanding. We've come to the point where as we get older, I don't want to learn anymore. I don't want to know those things. So it's like humans decide for themselves, I'm going to start shutting down my brain. And maybe it just happens subconsciously. But there is so much going on and happening. Why would you ever want to say, I'm getting too old to learn?
Mhm.
I think there should be a general contribution of all segments of society. So when somebody said, well, Biden's too old, we needed somebody younger, that's a perception. Maybe we need to consider the younger to be able to bring along the new ideas, but then you consult and work with the person who has the experience to say, what do you think? How does this work? How did your experience in life put this together? In other words, I just feel it should be a collective collaboration of all minds and peoples, and forget about
The age factor.
getting old. Age is relative. It is just blooming relative. So let's concentrate on living and learning. And what happens, happens. I think there's a text about living your life to the fullest, enjoy.
Yeah.
That's the way I look at it. Thank you.
I think that I can agree with you. I think for about 100%. Certainly, and the church actually can play a major role in some of these things. There is in many places on the local level the need to help people with new technology and elderly people with new technology. And that is something that the church can offer not just to its members, but also for people around in the community. Because for all of us, we suddenly in Corona time had to master some computer programs that we didn't know. And for some, that was not a major problem. For others, it was a major problem. And we needed the help from one another to master some of these challenges. Also, this learning process, there is a lot that also local churches can do. And not all of us want to play bingo or want to be entertained by programs for senior citizens, where really we look for the lowest intellectual denominator. So there are things that can be done by the church to help its older members in this continuous learning process, in this exploring process. And I mentioned this word intergenerativity. That is really another word for what you were saying. Try to complement one another, and then you find it is possible to interact with people of different ages in quite a normal and positive way. So yeah, agree with you in what you said.
There's a flip side to this too, I think, Ray and Bobby and Reinder. Reinder, you mentioned that, our children don't want our stuff. You don't know what to do with your library. And I have discovered in recent years that no one in my family is interested in my cut glass. Mm-hmm. And so it really philosophically, I think, has begged the question, what is it that we can leave our children if they don't want our stuff? And I think that we can consider the fact that, as for some of us, many of us here, older people, that we've had experiences in life that when we went through those experiences and our children were young, that we were very careful not to be fully disclosing. We were careful to protect them. We were careful to shield them because we felt that they were too young, too immature to bear, whatever that circumstance might be, financial trouble, job fears, divorce, whatever. And now that, at least in my case, my children are adults, I have found that I am better able to share with them. And that perhaps the things I learned when I went through those experiences can be useful to them in their lives today. And so maybe we turn the tables around and create value for ourselves and to our children, is to not be unwilling to share our experiences any longer because they really can be a blessing. There's and I know everybody's experienced this. There's so much I wish I'd asked my grandparents, so much I wish I'd asked my mother, and of course they're all gone, so it's not possible to go back there again. But we do have something. We do have something to leave them in that regard, I think, from an experiential standpoint. Carolyn, welcome to you. Weigh in here. What's on your mind?
Right. I see Gerald is back. If you want to go to him first, that's fine. But
Well, you go next, and then I'll come to Jerry after that.
well,
Thank you, though. Thank you.
My work actually is a nurse practitioner working with geriatric patients in nursing homes. And so I just want, from a couple things that I've gleaned on this, I would agree with Ray in that, stay active, stay a part of things, the hobbies that you mentioned, Reinder, are also important. I have some people that are willing to lay flat in bed and do nothing or watch reruns of Mayberry RFD. I just, I don't understand it. I would go start raving mad. But the main point that I wanted to bring up is to talk with your families about what it is you want. About, have that written down, have your advanced directives written down so that others aren't left to guess what it is that you want done, whether you want to go to the hospital and have CPR done and everything done, or, if sometimes my thought is there are worse things than dying, and that's my 2 cents.
Mm-hmm. Well, that is your contribution to the element of putting your house in order. And what that means is very different in each individual case. And there is no set formula as to how that should be done. But yeah. Thank you very much.
Yes, indeed. And I might just mention, because of in the past few years, a recent experience with my mother-in-law is that do not assume that a DNR order will follow your aging relative or you around the healthcare system, because guess what? They don't. And somebody has to manage that process. And Jerry, I see you nodding. So come on and weigh in and talk about, I keep saying that. I don't know why. I think it's because I think everybody has important things to say. Oh, Jerry, I still can't hear you. I'm so sorry. If you send me a chat message with your comment or question, I'll be glad to share it. So let me come to Terry and Sandra. I saw you guys last night. Well, it was last night for me.
Last night was yesterday morning, and now it's Sunday here in Brisbane, Queensland, and it's 5 o'clock in the morning, and I don't usually get up that early. Well, I do get up that early, but, it's a bit of a culture shock, and I see a couple of my other friends there, George Tichy and the other Terry Dunder from Whitby. So, missed out a bit of Reinder's introduction, and I guess, Reinder, you probably know somebody on E14 that we know 14, that's Lyndon Rogers.
Yes.
Yeah.
We stayed with them, was it last year? Yeah.
Yeah. You were down here last year, and I looked at your presentation. That was great. Thank you very much. So I say down here because we are down, I guess. The system here in Australia, probably as far as healthcare is concerned, is slightly, if not a lot, different than the American system. And I won't go into that, but I learn a lot from my grandsons. I have a 19-year-old and a 16-year-old and a 14-year-old grandson, and they're really tech savvy, especially the 14-year-old. And if I want to know something about digital internet computers, I ask them, and they're very forthcoming in letting me know what's going on in the world. It's very interesting about aging. I think aging has got, and I don't like walking past mirrors. I don't know whether you guys like walking past mirrors, but I certainly don't. I find that my wife and I, Sandra, have been pretty much addicted to, I shouldn't say addicted to, health, not only what we eat, but what we do as far as exercise is concerned. And we are fortunate enough to live quite close to a beach here in Brisbane, and we have for the last 20 years. We do a lot of exercising. My wife either goes to the gym or she walks on the beach or she runs on the beach. I don't literally mean on the beach, but on the boardwalk or the footpath along by the beach. My wife is 74 and I'm 76. We don't find it that difficult to do that because we've been doing it for so long now. As a rule, I cycle just about every day, and I'm not trying to brag. I'm just trying to push the concept of being healthy as you get older. My grandsons run what we call a park run. Every Saturday they run 5Ks with a big group of people that do it right throughout Australia. They started to encourage me to run. I used to be a runner, and so they say, Fuff, you get Fuff, grandfather, whatever you like. You need to start running. So we did that about several years ago. So some days I run 6, 7, 8Ks. Some days I just run 2, but I try and run it real quick. And my wife does similar. We run together, and we don't feel. Sometimes because we're running, we don't feel that old. But sometimes when some young people go past us at 100 miles an hour, we feel pretty old. But I think sometimes the key to aging is making sure you're healthy, not only physically but spiritually as well. Our church is E14, which is a system very much the same as this. We don't get as many members as here. I'm looking, there's 108. Usually at our meeting, there's probably half as many. But it's still a great church, and we can do it on Zoom. We don't always have the personal interaction, although from time to time my wife takes a sermon. And I'm still on call at school. I've been a school teacher since the mid-70s, after I went to Avondale University. So 50 years. And I teach elementary. I think you call it elementary school in the States. We call it primary school here. And usually 2 days a week, I might be teaching anything from what we call prep, which is children about the age of 4, up to year 6, which is children up to about the age of 11 or 12. That keeps me young as well. I only do it on call. So the school calls me at least twice a week. I don't ask to go. They ring me and say, can you come in? And I think to myself, well, here I am, 76, and I'm still in front of a classroom with young people. Doesn't seem to be a problem to them. And sometimes I have the old stories, or maybe that my parents used to tell me, and I tell them the old stories, and they're quite attentive. So there's a lot of things to enjoy about being old. We're in the process of future-proofing our house, and somebody mentioned about where you live. I think it was Lauren that was talking about where you live. It might have been you, Reinder. Is important. We have a daughter that lives in Sydney. Sydney is 2,000 kilometres away, or over 1,000 miles from where we live. So we see her not as often as we would like to, but we speak to her just about every day. She's a professor at the University of Sydney, and that's where her life and her job is. We have another daughter that lives just over the river from us, which is about 30 minutes drive, and that's where our grandsons are. So we have contact, but we haven't contemplated the move as such at this stage. We're quite happy where we are. But thank you for listening.
Yeah, and thank you for telling your story. And give our greetings to Lyndon and his wife, please. But it's great when you are in such good health and such good condition. The reality is, of course, that for many of us that is not the case. And now, in some cases, it has been because people have really not tried to stay healthy or have not tried to keep on their mobility. But for some, simply life has gone in a different direction, and health is not quite as good. And I think that our age group, we ought to give the support, in particular, also to those who do not have that good fortune of being in such a good health. But yeah, even when we cannot do 1 or 2 kilometers a day, there are still things that most people can do, and it's important to. But especially, you mentioned also spiritual health, and that is so important also. And that is also where we have a communal responsibility, where the local church also has a responsibility, and where something like ATSS has a role. Sometimes it is assumed that only younger people have questions, and that only younger people and middle-aged people have their doubts. But I have noticed that it is also, maybe even so, more people who have come to a little later in life, who have very existential questions about where they are and what is going to happen, and whether what the future holds, as far as the church is concerned, etc., etc. So there is a communal responsibility also to support one another, and to help people, especially also on the spiritual level.
Jerry, I'm presuming you feel like you probably cannot speak, but let me.
I can speak.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm talking about Jerry Lofthouse. Jerry,
Sorry.
I'm so sorry. We got 2 Jerrys. We got Gerald and Jerry, and I call
Jerry
Gerald.
Lofthouse, go ahead.
Yeah, forgive me. I asked you to unmute, but let me see. Put your hand up again.
Well, my hand is up. You mean Jerry
I know.
Lofthouse?
Hang on. I'm just trying to get Gerald Lofthouse in because we've.
I think Jerry's having trouble with his computer microphone, so he did.
It could be, but let me rephrase his question then, because he sent it out in the
Write
chat.
it here, yeah.
And maybe some of you saw it. He talked about sort of the ideology of how we've been taught to think about things. It's like when we're young, we're taught to respect our elders. When we get old, we're told to act our age, or that's sort of conveyed to us somehow. And he cites the experience recently. I know his son, Trevor, when Trevor and his wife were at the house, and they apparently gave kudos to Jerry for being down on the floor with the grandson. And he took from that they felt like he wasn't acting his age. They were glad he did it, but they thought he wasn't acting his age, when he felt like he was just being himself. And so how does that fit in? We have this mindset about acting our age. I look at that. At my age, I can wear anything I want. I can wear red lipstick if I want. I can, I'm like Iris, what's her name, that had the big glasses and wore the red lipstick and was in fashion design. I mean, I feel like there are fewer boundaries for me because I'm older. I don't have people that will fire me if I look a certain way or say a certain thing. But what about this, Reinder? Are we restricted by these cultural perceptions, as Jerry has suggested?
We're old fast. I don't believe it.
We are getting into the more difficult questions now. The answer, I would say, is yes and no. I think we ought to give people the personal freedom to live as they want to live, and to dress as they want to dress, and to use what we call jewelry as they see fit. At the same time, you are also part of a community, and there are certain things, if you want to function in that community, that where you will have to maybe draw some borders and draw some boundaries. But the basic thing is that you should feel happy in what you do because it's you. And as long as it is not a kind of perverse desire to shock or something similar, I think we ought to very, very careful with putting or making people put boundaries to what they do and how they feel and how they present themselves. And it's clear that cultures may differ, that in some environments you would yourself act differently than you would do when you're, yeah.
Thank you for that. I'm going to come to Jerry with a J, and I know that you're unmuted, and I'm going to ask Ira to hang on because I'm going to come to you next. All right, and then Laura, you'll be up. You'll be up third. So Jerry, thank you for being patient. What are you thinking?
Well, I just want to shift the paradigm a little bit. And one of many things I've come to appreciate about Lauren over the years is his reflecting on his younger years and how he thinks different, how we all think different, but he is very transparent. But I'd like to maybe mention to the other pastors who are on this forum with us, maybe you have sat on the bedside of church members like I have over the years who are dying and felt betrayed by the church because we as pastors preached about the very soon coming of Jesus, and here they are dying and Jesus hasn't come. And so my question for the pastors listening, if you could rewind 30 or 40 years, is there anything theologically you would say different about longer range planning?
Oh,
and
boy.
then I want to come back with some statistics and a couple other things.
Okay. Wow. What do you think, Reinder?
Well, he was asking the question to whether there are pastors on the in the group, but I have done some pastoral work, of course, but most of my work has been in institutional work and in administrative situations. So I have not guided that many people through their last sickness as maybe the average pastor has. But I've always tried in preaching and in writing to not emphasize the element of soonness of the coming of Christ, but the element of preparedness for whenever it would come. And I think that is more important as time continues. The soonness and that element has had a practical implication in our church that we make no long-range plans, and that somehow changes the atmosphere in the church. We have always elections. 5 years from now, we elect new people, or at least we start with new slogans and we start with new plans without having actually implemented the previous one or having evaluated the previous one. But any new person who comes in throws away everything that his predecessor has done and starts something new. That has brought this short-term planning. This is one thing I will do, and so that becomes the slogan for the next 5 years.
Well, also, Reinder, because our church has focused so much on our Daniel seminars and Revelation seminars, and the very heart of some of that is the imminent return. Now, we have done that for 180 years. I like to say 100% of our evangelists have been wrong 100% of the time in using current events to predict the second coming.
Yeah.
But so my question, and Lauren, please jump in. If you could rewind, how would you approach it differently?
Jerry, I've done this rewind that you're suggesting many times. And I have to say that I somehow got through an entire career of being a Seventh Adventist pastor without ever mentioning once persecution by the Catholics or Jesus coming immediately or any of those fearful things. I don't know how I did it. I mean, they probably wanted to fire me a few times, but I managed to get through those years. But yeah, it's really hard. This sense that we carried around with us that there's no time left, but at the same time, please give your money because we've got to build this new church. Jerry, I mean, it didn't make any sense.
Or $27 million on amazing fax building recently.
Well, yeah. And I have to say, at this point in my life, I'm finally able to say, I actively resent some of the ways that they pushed us into manipulating people and pushing people with the soon second coming. I really do. I don't know, not Bjorn, Reinder, if you feel that way at times.
Yeah. But what surprises me is that still this thing is going on, and it still apparently impresses people. And we are getting a little bit off subject maybe, but when I see that one of the major churches in the United States is now planning for a symposium on the identity of the woman in Revelation 17, then you wonder, well, I no longer wonder why people walk away, because that is not what worries us.
Yes.
And certainly it's not something that worries us in the, and there we are back on the topic, at this stage of our life. That is not the question that I'm asking myself. Who is the harlot in Revelation 17?
Yeah, years ago, my conference president, this is Kansas, Nebraska conference, where I spent most 23 years of my 35 years, asked me to do a seminar for our pastors at pastors meetings on long-range financial planning for pastors. Mm-hmm. And the younger pastors were sitting near the back of the auditorium, and most of the pastors over 35, 40 came up to me after and said, Jerry, I wish I had have heard this information, years ago. I had a number of the younger pastors come up to me after and say, I can't do what you and Kathy did, planning long range financially, because it creates too much cognitive dissonance for me. Mm-hmm. To plan for my retirement, squirreling away money and preach the soon second coming and tell the members to give so we can get the message out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they've seen that.
Yeah.
And
Jerry, I don't want to cut you.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
No, you said you had some statistics, and I didn't know if there was something particular you were going to share.
Let me just jump to one other thing. Well, I mean, we all know how like 65% of retirees have nothing saved for retirement. Now that's just across in North America. You know, that's just some statistics. But here, one other little piece that's more germane to the church, and then I'll put my hand down and get off. If you remember, I mean, you as a group remember a few years back, the Sabbath School Quarterly was on stewardship.
Mm-hmm.
The author of that was a friend of mine, and he used to work in the Kansas-Nebraska Conference as stewardship director before he moved to other places. His office was right across from the college church where I was the pastor, and at Union College, the college church at Union College. And I mean, he and I spent hours over the years he lived in Lincoln, you know, talking about what stocks we were buying and, you know, sort of the long range planning. And when he tried to talk about that, put it into the quarterly, it got edited out.
Yeah, a lot of that happens actually.
Yeah, no, well, I've had other friends write who stuff got edited out, but I just thought that was like a really, he was angry, but that's you know, tells you a little bit about, you know, how we control the narrative, how the system controls the narrative, which I wonder, you know, is that the most ethical thing for the system to do to the church family?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm done.
Thank you. Yeah, it was in 2015 when the secretary of the General Conference got up and said, "We'll never have another General Conference," and here we are. So, Reinder, did you want to respond to that?
That has been the story for 5 or 6 or 7 general conferences all along. This is the last one. That is the last one. But yeah.
Let me, Laura, I understand you have a really interesting question, so hang on for just a second. Ira has a question, and he wasn't sure how to raise his hand. Ira, you're unmuted.
Thank you. Yes.
There you are.
Can
we
you hear
can
me?
see you.
Yes.
Yes, and we can
Yes.
see you as well. Welcome. Thank you for
You're
being so
welcome.
patient. What are you thinking today?
Yeah. Okay. Goedemorgen, Dominic. Hoe gaat het? It's good to hear your voice, Reindeer. This is Lester. I don't know how my first name got put in, but you know me as Lester Kaiser.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Good to see you.
Yeah. So good to see you. First of all, it's such a blessing. For me, this was a twofold blessing because I just closed my eyes, and as you age, your voice sounds so much like my Dutch father and the Dutch sweet voice. And I had to focus back on you because I was just thinking about my dad. So thank you for those memories. Number two, my question is, I want to move this a little bit on a different tack based on what we're saying. Do you think that we have a real story to tell as a local church, obviously, and as individuals, for the senior citizens, as we know, the aging? Yeah,
Lester,
we didn't like this. Yes,
we did not hear your question because your audio faded. You had a question. Can you restate it, please?
Yes, my question is simply: do we have, as a local church, and as individuals, have a real opportunity to proclaim the commandment of honor thy father and thy mother? And I mean that in the sense that the biggest situation of seniors today is loneliness. I know there are cultural differences, and I know that some of you know that our nursing homes are getting full. And we also know that the older you get, the more you're very concerned about who's going to take care of you. Reinder knows that the assisted living concept started in Holland, where they wanted to make it more like a situation, not like a nursing home. Okay, here's the other part of my question. I lived in many different countries, and now that I've married a Mexican and am living in Mexico, my wife was totally appalled, and the rest of her family, when they heard that in the US I was going to be put in a nursing home if I got old. They said, never in your life will you ever get to be a nursing home, because we'll be here to take care of you. Okay. And I think part of the culture of the Latin Americas and the Asians is, I think, a further strengthening of the commandment, honor your father and your mother, where you really take a big interest in your parents and in the older generation to really take care of you more than putting you in a nursing home. So simply, we probably need something as a church to broaden that concept in the commandment, because I think it'll give a lot of hope to Christians and non-Christians if we preach that and believe that firmly, because I think we have a lot to learn from what the commandment says about honoring your father and mother and taking care of the aging.
And Reinder, before you respond, let me just mention that it's poignant, Lester, that you would raise this question on the Sabbath, since I had to teach this morning, where, in fact, in the Gospel of Mark, we are talking about the concept of Korban, which is specific to the Gospel of Mark. And it's interesting, and I did not know this, that the Pharisees and the religious leaders that employed this method of avoiding taking care of their parents didn't just pull it out of thin air. They used a misguided proof texting, a distorted proof texting method, taking a text from Numbers 30 to twist it around. And in modern day parlance, we would say they put their money in a family trust and said, oh, golly, mom and dad, sorry, but my money's tied up in a family trust and I wish I could give you something, but I really can't. So that's what we talked about today. So Reinder, how do you respond to Lester's question?
Well, first of all, it's good to see Lester. And I remember his father very well, and stayed at one point in his home in Suriname. And but Lester, in the Netherlands, it used to be very common for people to take in their aging parents. When I grew up as a child, my grandfather was part of our family after he became single. But all kinds of things have changed that. Government regulations, housing situations, but the mentality also of the people. Because now, I think the majority of the elderly would say, no, I don't want to live with my children because I don't want to be a burden to them. And so they would be looking for another solution. And fortunately, it is not the only solution that parents are going to live with their children. And in some places it's good. There are now people who say when we have a big garden, you can actually put a small mobile home in your garden for your parent. And they have made the regulations to do so a lot easier from what they were. There are different things that are being experimented with. But in whatever culture or whatever political or social situation, it remains a commandment, a very important principle that we are responsible to some extent at least, for the well-being of our parents. And it is surprising to see that the Korban solution is so often opted for in forms that are possible in our society, so that we try to benefit ourselves rather than even our closest relatives, our parents. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the point I was also bringing is I understand all the cultural differences, but the core in every one of them is we're afraid to be alone,
Yeah.
to be lonely. you know, and I think as a church, we can address that core need. You don't have to be alone.
Mhm. Well,
Indeed.
A local church, we will be here for you. You don't even have to be a Christian. I will be there for you. Just knowing that makes me sleep better at night, that I'm not going to be alone.
but it's interesting that we have a children's department, we have a women's department, we have in some places a men's department, but we don't have a department for the elderly. There is no special ministry in most places for the elderly. And yes, and the issue of loneliness is one of the issues that we need to address collectively.
Yes, thank you, Lester, for your provocative question. Laura, would you like my cut glass?
I have to take a look at it there. I have a great deal of respect for Reinder, and not just because he's older than me, but I actually wanted to address this question to some of the women here on the group because, and Lauren's making me say this one out loud, so I apologize for being repetitive of what's in the chat, but men and women experience aging differently. The perception of us is different, and our experience of value in society is different as we age. And I wondered if any of you had wanted to talk about your experience, or how do you deal philosophically with the issue of your continued value and dignity, because they're not as available to women as we age as they are to men.
If there are any women who would like to respond, raise your hand and I will unmute you right now to do that. Who wants to weigh in on that? I don't know why I keep saying that. Wow. Gosh, Laura, nobody does.
Well,
Here's Carolyn. Okay, good, Carolyn. And Olive will too. Carolyn, I've got you unmuting first here. And then Olive, I'll come to you after that. So Carolyn?
There we go.
There you go.
So I have an issue with my voice. I say I'm going to be Katharine Hepburn when I grow up because I have a spasm and a tremor in it, which I think makes me, I did pass into my 6th decade this year, but I think it makes me sound a bit older than what I am. I feel like it has taken me to a bit of a sideline of people listening to me. It's not the things I say at times are not acknowledged as much, or also when it's really bad, I have a difficult time speaking. And so if you can't participate, you feel sidelined. So that's my experience with things.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a vulnerability. I can appreciate what you're saying. Thank you so much for that. Olive, you're unmuted. What is your thought about that?
Yeah, regarding your question, I think it all depends on the family. Regarding, who receives more respect, whether it's the aging mother or the aging father, the aging woman, the aging man. Because I find in my own family, my mother lived until 88, my father until he was 96. And my mother was like caregiver to my father, but she died before him unexpectedly. And when she died, it's like the entire foundation of the family had just fallen under. And he didn't even want to live anymore. He just died like 6 weeks after. And it's not that he was really sick. He was, he was as sharp as a whistle and everything. He just died of I think just a broken heart. But my mother I wouldn't say there was more respect or what, but I think the value of my mother to the family was just taken for granted. But obviously, with her passing, everybody saw that it's like everything had just fallen down. So I don't know if I compare. It's not that we didn't respect my father either. He was the father, and but as far as he was concerned, she was just the foundation of everything. So, it just all depends on the family. In society, I think, though, perhaps in the public life, there seems to be more respect given to the aging male than the aging female, due to our concept of, male aesthetics and female aesthetics, male beauty, female beauty. It's as though when the man ages, he's like vintage. When the woman ages, it's like, something else. So there are those two, layers of, respect and regard for male and female aging.
Laura, did you want to respond? Did you want to make a follow-up comment? If you do, you'll have to raise your hand so I can unmute you. No, she said she's good. Oh, she's good. I think it is true, though, Olive and Laura, that men who become widowed tend to not thrive as long afterwards as women who become widowed might manage to last. Olive, you're still unmuted. Have you heard that as well? It sounds like that's really kind of your experience.
Yes, and I've seen it in my extended family. Yeah, when men becoming withered they just don't live very long after, but women, because as I said, our mom was like caregiver to our father, and she just died suddenly. Everyone is thinking he'll die soon, and then my mother would have some free time to travel and all of that stuff, but it just didn't work out that way. But because I didn't think we were thinking she would not survive well his passing, but obviously, we saw that in other extended family members, the husbands just didn't do well with the wife's passing at all.
Well, at the risk of sounding immoderate, which I don't mean to be, I often say to my husband, I hope and pray that I will precede him in death, because if he dies ahead of me, I will have to immediately move into an ALF setting, because I cannot manage any of my devices. I can't manage my phone, my computer, the internet, the TV, you name it. So I guess the underpinning of the family can be variant, just depending on what the needs are. So Jerry, let me come back to you again and ask you to unmute if you have a follow-up, but I want to make sure I get in Lauren's comment and Dr. Johnston's as well. Go ahead.
Or just a quick one. And they say confession is good for the soul. I must confess that although I took 2 years of Hebrew from Dr. Leona Running at the seminary, or 2 semesters, I should say, I haven't kept up to it like I have my Greek. But I've read some Old Testament scholars who said the commandment, honor your father and mother. And I understand in the context of a Middle Eastern culture where the senior people, the status and honor they gave. But these Old Testament scholars said that the real idea there is not as much honoring your father and mother, because frankly, even some biblical characters were not very honorable, but rather that we, the children, live in such a way that our life brings honor to our father and mother. And that shifts that paradigm quite a lot. Just a thought. Dr. Hemming, if you want to weigh in from the Hebrew, or Dr. Johnson, please do.
Well, I can unmute Dr. Johnston, or ask him to unmute, rather.
Okay. Well, I wasn't going to comment on that, but I think that thought is brought out in the book of Proverbs many times, that children dishonor their parents by being bad people. Could I bring up the question that I wanted to ask?
Yeah, go ahead. We'll come to Lauren last then, because he has other things as well. Sure.
I think for hundreds of years, the three-generation household was the norm. And I think the loss of the three-generation household, partly because of family mobility and things, is the root of many of our troubles. Right now in the advanced world, there is such a low birth rate that population is declining. In South Korea, which I think has the lowest fertility rate in the world, it's 0.72. And when you interview the people there, I think you get answers that are somewhat similar to what you would find in the United States, at least. The cost of childcare and educating the children is so prohibitive. People just don't want to have kids. But if you have, in a three-generation household, you have babysitters at hand. You have little children, maybe not older children, but little children actually like to hear what the old people have to say. They like to hear them tell stories or read to them and things like that, which gives a lot of fulfillment to the older people. If somehow we were able to restore the norm of the three-generation household, I think it would be good for all three generations. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Reinder, did you want to comment on that?
I think there's a lot to say for what Dr. Johnson is saying. You need a different kind of housing strategy, however, in order to make that possible. And at least as where we live also, there are a lot of fiscal things that would need to be looked at. But people, it's not just that they want a two-generation household, but we have so many also one-generation households now. The place where we live, they are building lots of houses, but the population is not increasing because there are fewer and fewer individuals per house. So it seems it's a trend that on the one hand, we fear loneliness, especially at the end of life, but we seek being alone, it seems, during a large part of our lives. At least many do. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I would just mention, too, that I was invited to take part in an Alzheimer's study, not because I have it, but because of my age. And I found it very interesting. If any of you, I would encourage two things. If you have a chance to do that, it's an endeavor that's funded through the National Institutes of Health and through colleges and universities, and it's the local university here through which I'm participating. But you play games as a part of the study, and of course, it's all algorithmically worked out so they understand what you're doing. But curiously enough, they say that if you do it, and I'm in the third year, and it's not a lot of time commitment, but that you will drive better and that you will also walk faster. The drive better, I understand, because it improves your peripheral vision, but the walking, I'm not sure. But the other thing I would say is that my mother was widowed twice, and neither of her husbands had a will. So if you have been recalcitrant about that, think about it. So Lauren, you're last, I think, and I know you have a number of things to say about next week, as well as any question for.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to get in here is we have another of our elder theologians teaching us next week. That is Charles Scriven. Some of you know Charles as Chuck Scriven. Been a longtime friend of mine. I was pastor of his brother and buried both Elder and Mrs. Scriven, the elder Mr. and Mrs. Scriven, who lived here in Ohio. And Chuck, I asked Chuck what he is teaching about, and he says Christian leadership. He said, how do we understand Christian leadership now that much of the world seems indifferent, or even in the case of the evangelical right wing, they seem a bit hostile. People have begun to feel a bit hostile toward Christians. We often hear about Christian nationalism and the influence of evangelical Christians. The fact of the matter is that here in the United States, they are a distinct minority. They have an outsized influence, but they're not particularly appreciated for what they do among younger people. So he's going to talk about Christian leadership, and it should be interesting. The week after that, I have Ron Graybill coming. And again, some of you know Ron, and Ron is going to talk about, again, is there a role? And now there's so much we know about Ellen White now that we didn't know before. We know, for example, that she actually did plagiarize. We hate to acknowledge it, but it's true. And what's the role of Ellen White? Can Ellen White still be appreciated? Ron is going to ask, even in this sort of now that we have more knowledge than we had at one time. So this should be interesting. And then the week after that, last week in the month, Reinder, you're coming back. I don't know what you're speaking of about that week. You mentioned it to me, but I didn't jot it down.
What was it that we had agreed?
Two edgy emails.
Here we are. All of us, none of us can remember it. It's okay. We've got plenty of time before then. There's several weeks before then, so don't worry too much about it.
I'm talking about reputation, Lauren.
Oh, that should be interesting. Yeah. How do we think about well, it kind of relates to what we're talking about today, doesn't it?
Reputation, the church's reputation, God's reputation. These are some of the things that
okay,
we're going to, if that's okay.
That's fine. I am posting in the chat again that one of the parts of our fundraiser right now is my friend Bjorn's running all the way from Big Ben to the Eiffel Tower. And he's really doing it by himself, just running day after day after day. Makes me, just amazes me. And so he hit up a bunch of us for, you know, this trick where if I run so far, you give me so much per mile. Mm-hmm. And as I said early on, we were talking about this in the board meeting, and one guy said, whatever Lauren gives, I'll give twice as much. And I thought, boy, I'm going to have to really boost it. I want to get this guy. So I said, $5 a mile. He says, okay, I'll do 10. And so any of you who want to pitch in on this, the link is on our website and on Facebook, and you can just give a check or whatever. But we do have 3 fundraisers a year, and so I pitched in on this one at $5 a mile. So I mean, somewhere, I don't know, it's about 230 miles. So whatever it is, at $1,500 or so. I'm delighted to do that. I love what Adventist today is doing. I'm very proud of it. I have no hesitation at all in coming to you and saying, help us to raise money for Adventist today. We've done a good thing for the Adventist Church. I'm proud of it. So I wanted to mention that to you. Finally, we're at 4:00. I'll just mention one more thing on our topic today, Reinder, and you can respond or not as you like. I remember when I was about 30 years old, I said to an older pastor, I said, isn't it going to be nice when those of us in my generation get into leadership and we're not pressed down by all this conservatism, and we're all going to be, the church is going to become progressive and open and transparent, and we're going to acknowledge things, and we're going to be a different church. Well, Reinder, guess what? Never happened. There's still those of us who are progressive, but the church didn't become progressive. It didn't follow in that the direction that I thought it was going to be. In fact, I think it's probably more conservative now than when I was young. I don't know what to say about that. It wasn't what I expected. Was it what you expected?
No, but there were people when we were young who were progressive and who inspired us.
Yes.
And I think that to at least to some limited extent, I think I have remained a progressive, and
Yes.
I'm trying to inspire others to remain progressive. And I know that there is a considerable number of people that rely on people like you and me and many others to remain hopeful and to preserve some of that freshness that we have been striving for all along. So
Yes.
I'm not prepared to give up,
Nor am I. It does annoy me a little bit when I realize that in both the political world and the church world, if you're critical and hateful and say that the church is going to hell, those people get big contributions. If you say we're progressive, we want to love the church and keep it going and make it a place where young people can feel comfortable, it's much harder to get attention. That discourages me, I'll be honest.
That's true. Well,
Hey,
it's
thank
sometimes,
you, Reinder.
but there are so many times that you also hear, and I'm sure you hear, that people say, well, it has been meaningful what you have been doing. It has been meaningful what you have been writing or saying. And that keeps me going.
That's true too, and I have the same experience.